Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? Admiral Elizabeth Morgan sat at the far end of the Pentagon's secure conference room, eyes fixed on the satellite feed glowing across the main screen. The Black Hawk helicopter on the screen cut through a pale Afghan morning, rotors beating against silence, dust rising beneath it like ghosts from the desert. Every officer in the room watched the operation unfold, but no one glanced at her. Not once. She didn't care, at least that's what she told herself. Her posture remained exact, every inch of her uniform crisp, the 4 stars on her shoulders heavy with decades of service. She had been ignored before. She knew the weight of silence in a room full of men who doubted her presence. But doubt never altered the facts. The operation in progress was hers. Every piece of planning, every choice that brought those soldiers to that helicopter carried her name in ink. "Operation Diamondback is proceeding as planned," she said evenly, her voice cutting through tension like a blade. "Extraction in 3 minutes." No hesitation, no tremor, just control. The others nodded silently. They trusted her judgment even if they pretended not to. What they didn't know, what they could never see, were the old battles still lodged in her chest. The memories of being told she didn't belong. The whispers that she was a symbol, not a leader. 30 years of proving otherwise had taught her to show nothing but steel. The secure phone on the table chimed. A sound too sharp, too deliberate. She answered. "Morgan here." "Liz." The voice belonged to General David Wilson, Academy classmate, old friend, now liaison to Naval Intelligence. His tone carried urgency, the kind that erased years of familiarity. "We need to talk. Project Centurion." Her grip tightened around the receiver. Centurion. That word hadn't been spoken aloud in years. It wasn't supposed to exist outside closed doors. "I'm in the middle of something, David." "It cannot wait. My office, 1900 hours." The line went dead. Elizabeth lowered the phone slowly, her expression unreadable. Wilson never cut through protocol during an active op. Never. Her officers continued watching the screen, oblivious to the shift in her chest, the silent weight pressing down like a storm that hadn't yet broken. Hours later, after the mission ended clean, she stood at the wide window of Naval Command, Washington's monuments glowing white beyond the river. Eternal stone watching over fragile human choices. Her thoughts, though, were elsewhere. Half a world away, in the South China Sea where American carriers danced with Chinese warships in dangerous proximity. "Admiral, incoming transmission from the USS Reagan." She moved swiftly, eyes falling to the tactical display. Chinese vessels forming an aggressive pattern. A test. A game of inches and nerves. "Maintain course and speed," she ordered. "Activate Aegis systems. Weapons tight, track everything." It was the subtle power of restraint. A message without a shot fired. "We see you. We are prepared, but we will not be baited." Crisis passed. Chinese ships shifted, tension easing back toward stalemate. Another fire contained, another breath held. But her thoughts still circled the phone call, Project Centurion, and something even older. That evening she walked the Pentagon's marble corridors beside a young officer, Lieutenant Reynolds, newly assigned, unshakably professional. But when he mentioned a phrase, Operation Archimedes, 1999 her steps faltered. She had not heard those words spoken aloud in decades. A mission that officially never happened. A mission where 4 impossible shots had saved lives no one knew she had touched. She entered Wilson's office and he wasted no time. He slid a photograph across the desk. Shooting targets, long-range competition, the elite marksman challenge. "We want you to compete." She studied him, searching for the hidden play. "I haven't fired a rifle in 15 years. There are younger officers, more skilled." "None with your background, none with your rank." Elizabeth's face stayed neutral, but inside memories stirred. Archimedes, those shots, the knowledge that someone else had claimed them. "You're using me as bait," she said finally. I'm using your skills in a strategic capacity, Wilson countered. Centurion needs this, and Harrison, Colonel Michael Harrison, is watching. If you step into his arena, his allies will reveal themselves. Harrison, the ghost, a legend, and a man who had spent his career declaring that women had no place in the fight. Elizabeth turned to the window, the city lights stretching beyond. Compete? As a flag officer, it was unheard of, it was madness. And yet, something in her father's old words whispered back, the enemy doesn't care if you're a woman, they only care if you're accurate. She returned her gaze to Wilson. Her voice was calm, steady, unflinching. I'll compete, but when this is over, Archimedes is declassified, the truth comes out. The general studied her, then nodded once. Done. That night in the quiet of her Georgetown apartment, Elizabeth unlocked a case that hadn't been touched in years. Inside lay her father's old Remington 700, the rifle that had taught her the rhythm of breathing, the stillness of patience, the truth of precision. She ran her fingers across the wood, worn smooth by time, by lessons, by hands that had believed in her when the world did not. Breathing controls everything. Half breath, hold, squeeze, never pull. Her father's voice, her inheritance, her anchor. Tomorrow she would train again. Tomorrow she would stand against the ghost. Tomorrow she would carry not only her name, but every unspoken fight, every silenced doubt, every hidden truth. But tonight she sat with the rifle across her lap, staring into silence, the city lights flickering against the glass. Somewhere out there, enemies waited, allies whispered, old lies festered. And she wondered, when the moment came, would they see her as bait, as a symbol, or as the marksman who once turned a battlefield with 4 impossible shots? The answer, she knew, would come down to breath, steel, and a single pull of a trigger. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. Sometimes it doesn't argue. It simply acts. She stood alone on the firing line, a weapon she hadn't touched in 15 years staring back at her like a test she hadn't studied for. The Barrett M82A1 gleamed under the Virginia morning light, 30 pounds of steel and recoil, waiting. Admiral Elizabeth Morgan pressed her palm to the cold receiver, a small ritual of acknowledgement, then settled behind the rifle. Winds light from the west, target at 300. Lieutenant Reynolds spoke with the calm confidence of a man who'd been here 1,000 times. Former SEAL, young enough to be her son, now assigned as her liaison and trainer. His voice carried no judgment, only measured guidance. Elizabeth drew a breath, exhaled halfway and squeezed. The shot thundered across the range, the recoil shoving against her shoulder like an old adversary. Through the scope, the round struck 6 inches left of center. Close, but not perfect. 6 left, Reynolds called, eyes pressed to the spotting scope. Elizabeth chambered another round. Adjust, fire, impact closer, a third shot dead center. She lowered her cheek from the stock, lips tightening in something that wasn't quite a smile. Better, Reynolds said. She didn't reply. Inside, she was thinking of Montana, long summer evenings on her father's ranch, a Marine sniper's quiet voice teaching her how to read wind through grass, how to steady a heartbeat in stillness. She had been 12 when she'd first shouldered a .3006, and recoil had nearly knocked her off the stool. Her father had laughed, not unkindly, and told her the lesson that had carried through every moment of her life. Control comes from patience, not force. But patience had limits. Now, 30 years later, patience was the thin line between proving herself again or confirming every whisper that she was a symbol, not a soldier. By the end of that first hour, she was walking the rifle across distances, 500, 700, 900 meters. The rhythm returned like muscle memory long dormant, her breathing locking into cadence, her body remembering how to absorb the Barrett's punishing recoil. At 1,000 meters, she steadied, squeezed, and watched the target's edge shudder under impact. Your recovery's fast, Reynolds observed. Most shooters take longer to reset after the Barrett. Elizabeth reloaded, gaze steady. My father started me young. The day bled into hours of repetition, shot after shot, correction after correction. When she left Quantico at sunset, her arms ached, her shoulders burned, but the rhythm, the forgotten rhythm, was returning. That night back in her apartment, she read Harrison's file again. Decorated, feared, a ghost in more ways than one. But the details weren't what held her attention. It was the photograph. Harrison's eyes, cold and certain, the expression of a man who believed the world owed him dominion. And in the margin of her father's old notebook, a single note scribbled in faded ink: "Don't trust ghost. He forgets instinct. He trusts machines." Her father had known him. The realization sat heavy, unanswered questions rising in her chest. The following morning, training resumed, but something had shifted. A message appeared on her phone mid-session from Wilson, just a handful of words. "Security breach, Harrison knows." She showed Reynolds, his jaw tightened. "Assume eyes are on us," he said, scanning the tree line. Elizabeth slid another round into the Barrett, her voice calm. "Let them watch." But in the silence between shots, she thought of the leak. She thought of Harrison, somewhere out there, smirking at the idea of her fumbling through his domain. And she thought of the truth he didn't know yet, the truth she had buried beneath decades of silence. Archimedes, those 4 impossible shots, the shots he had claimed. By the third day, a new voice joined them on the range. "Morning, Admiral." A grizzled Marine, Master Sergeant James Cooper, scout sniper, legend among quiet circles. He had trained competitors, operators, the kind of men whose names were never spoken outside whispers. "General Wilson thought you could use another set of eyes," he said, setting down his range bag. Elizabeth nodded. She didn't mind the extra scrutiny. She welcomed it. Cooper watched her fire a sequence, then crouched beside her, voice low. "Wind's your enemy here. At 1300, a 3-mile breeze pushes you 6 feet. Everyone underestimates it. Ghost doesn't. Don't give him that edge." Elizabeth studied him, then the targets downrange, the tiny flickers of flags and heat mirages that told stories to those who listened. She read them, adjusted, and her next shot struck the steel with a satisfying clang. "Good," Cooper muttered. "You read the wind like a book." She exhaled slowly, lowering the rifle. "My father taught me how to listen." That evening, she returned to her apartment and found him waiting. Robert Morgan, 85 years old, standing straight as if the Corps still demanded it. "Hello, Lizzie," he said, using the name no one else dared. She froze. "Dad." Word gets around when a 4-star admiral starts living on a rifle range. His eyes glinted with something sharper than nostalgia. "Thought you might need a reminder." They sat by the window, coffee between them, silence heavier than words. "You're going up against Harrison," Robert said finally, not a question. "You know him." Robert's jaw tightened. "Trained him, years ago. Good hands, bad heart, believes more in tools than instinct, and he took something that wasn't his." Elizabeth's breath caught. "Archimedes," she whispered. Robert's eyes narrowed. "I knew it wasn't him. Those 4 shots, that was you. Recognized the pattern. I didn't say a word, but I knew." She looked down at her cup, fingers trembling slightly against porcelain. The secret she had carried alone for decades, her father had always known. "Harrison doesn't deserve your silence," Robert said quietly. "Tomorrow you prove it, not with words, with shots he can't explain away." Elizabeth closed her eyes. The weight of years, of lies, of unspoken truth pressed hard against her chest. She had spent her life proving she belonged, but tomorrow wasn't about belonging. It was about taking back what had always been hers. And as she cleaned the Barrett late into the night, the echoes of her father's voice wrapped around her steady hands. "Breathing controls everything. Half breath, hold, squeeze." She would be ready. Why did they all go quiet the moment she walked into the staging area? Fort Benning buzzed with competition day nerves. Operators, snipers, and officers moved in knots of conversation, each man familiar with the rifle, the course, the challenge ahead. But when Admiral Elizabeth Morgan stepped into view, uniform sharp, 4 stars gleaming, talk died down. Eyes followed her, some curious, some cold, some outright hostile. She kept walking. Lieutenant Reynolds flanked her, his posture taut, scanning faces the way seals do when danger might wear a smile. Behind them, murmurs picked up again, low, sharp, barbed. Elizabeth had heard them all before, publicity stunt, diversity token, too old, out of touch. But she also caught a different note, worry. Because the men gathered here knew what it took to even attempt this challenge. And deep down, they knew she wouldn't be standing among them unless someone trusted her to deliver. Colonel Michael Harrison stood at the far end of the prep area. Even in a crowd, he was unmistakable. Tall, broad, the hard lines of a man who had lived under rucks and rifles longer than most careers lasted. He laughed at something one of his officers said, but the sound cut off when his eyes met hers. For a heartbeat, silence stretched between them, years of history, lies, and ghosts condensed into a single look. His jaw tightened, a flicker of recognition, maybe resentment. Then his expression shifted back to polite professionalism. "Admiral Morgan," he said when she approached, voice even, tone respectful, eyes sharp as glass. "Not often we see flag officers on a firing line." Elizabeth stopped a measured distance away. Her reply carried the same calm weight she'd used on warships and in boardrooms. "I understand you've set quite a standard here. 6 hits in 88 seconds. Impressive." Harrison's lips curved, but the smile never reached his eyes. Years of practice. This is exactly the skill set admirals keep sharp. The dig was deliberate. Elizabeth didn't flinch. "We all have hidden talents, Colonel. Some just stay hidden longer than others." Something flickered in his expression, irritation, quickly masked. His officers chuckled under their breath. Elizabeth turned away before they could enjoy her reaction, walking toward her assigned prep table. Reynolds stayed close. "Range Officers Williams," Reynolds murmured as they walked. "Served under Harrison in Afghanistan. Don't expect impartiality." Elizabeth nodded once. No surprise there. She had expected Harrison to salt the ground. What mattered was that the ground still held targets. Her father was waiting in the stands. Robert Morgan's presence alone shifted the atmosphere. Operators who'd grown up on whispered stories of Marine snipers recognized him instantly. Harrison saw him too, and for just a moment his composure cracked. Elizabeth caught it. A flicker of old tension, maybe fear. Wilson lingered near the VIP section, hands clasped behind his back. He gave Elizabeth the smallest of nods, the kind that said, "Everything you do now is being measured, not just here, everywhere." The safety briefing blurred into background noise. Elizabeth already knew the course: 6 targets, 300 to 1,300 meters, 1 shot each, 90 seconds. Harrison's record hung like a challenge no one else had touched. "Admiral Morgan will fire first," Williams announced. "Of course." She walked to the mat as whispers rippled behind her. Her name was announced over the PA, followed by the kind of silence that holds more weight than cheers. Some were waiting to watch her stumble. Some were hopping. Some were afraid of what success might mean. She knelt, lowered herself behind the Barrett, and the world narrowed to steel, scope, and silence. Her breathing slowed. Her father's voice echoed faintly in memory. "Breathing controls everything." The buzzer split the air. The first shot cracked, barrel bucking, smoke curling. 300 meters, hit. Target 1, impact. She worked the bolt, shifted, fired. 500, hit. Her heartbeat slowed even as the seconds bled away. 700, 900. Each shot struck clean, the rhythm flowing as if 15 years hadn't passed. The 1100 target shimmered through heat mirage. Wind flags bent differently halfway down range. She compensated, squeezed, impact confirmed. Only the last remained, 1,300 meters, maximum range, Harrison's kingdom. Elizabeth steadied. Calculations spun in her mind, drop, drift, crosswind at two separate altitudes. She trusted her father's formula, aimed not at the silhouette but at the empty air yards away from it. She breathed half-breath, hold, squeeze. The Barrett thundered, time slowed, the round flew. And the silhouette rocked under impact. Hit 6 for 6, time 86 seconds. Silence, then a ripple of applause, reluctant, rising, spreading until even some of Harrison's men couldn't withhold it. Elizabeth rose with measured calm, safed the rifle and stepped back. In the stands, Robert Morgan's face remained unreadable except for a single nod. Wilson's eyes gleamed with quiet victory. Harrison's expression was carved from stone. He passed her on his way to the line, leaning just close enough that only she could hear. "Beginner's luck only lasts so long, Admiral." Elizabeth's reply was a whisper, steady, certain. "It wasn't luck, and I'm not a beginner." Their eyes locked again, a private battlefield no one else could see. And as Harrison settled behind the rifle, Elizabeth knew one thing with absolute clarity. Today wasn't about breaking records. It was about breaking ghosts. The silence before Harrison's first shot felt heavier than the echo of hers. He lay prone, body rigid, every motion practiced, rehearsed, owned. Colonel Michael Harrison was built for this line, this stage, this crowd. Everyone knew it. His men whispered like a congregation awaiting their prophet. "Shooter ready," the range officer called. "Ready," Harrison replied, voice flat, certain. The buzzer sounded. His first round cracked, hammering the 300-meter target dead center. The crowd exhaled in unison. His reload was seamless, his rhythm ruthless. 500 hit, 700 hit. He was fast, faster than her. At 900 meters, the mirage shimmered. Harrison adjusted, fired, scored the hit. His pace was lethal, his control absolute. 1100. His scope tilted subtly. No pause, no calculation, just confidence. The target fell with mechanical certainty. Elizabeth stood still, expression unreadable. Her father watched quietly, his weathered hands folded. Reynolds leaned slightly toward her, voice barely audible. "He's packing to beat you." She knew Harrison's tempo was deliberate. He wasn't just firing to win, he was firing to erase. To prove that her run was a fluke, a trick, a lucky accident. The last target, 1,300. Wind tugged harder across the range now, invisible fingers twisting through flags. Harrison barely adjusted. He fired. Through the scope feed, the round cut wide. The silhouette remained untouched. A murmur rippled through the crowd. He reloaded fast, fired again. Miss a third time, miss. Each shot the same confident hold, the same refusal to adapt. Elizabeth's father's words surfaced in her mind. He forgets instinct. He trusts machines. Harrison trusted the range's electronic readings, the calibrated data feeds linked into his scope. But what he hadn't known, what Wilson's whispered warnings had foreshadowed, was that someone had tampered with them. Sabotage, subtle, intentional. Elizabeth's chest tightened as realization set in. The breach. Harrison wasn't the only one being watched. Finally, Harrison cursed under his breath. He shifted, recalculated manually, fired, and the target rang. 6 for 6, time 93 seconds. The range officer called it, but the air had changed. Harrison had hit them all, but the record stood with her. The murmurs grew louder, some confused, some skeptical. Harrison rolled to his feet, jaw clenched, fury buried under composure. "Congratulations," he said, voice tight. "Enjoy your moment." Elizabeth met his gaze, calm, steady. "It's not my moment, Colonel, it's the truth catching up." For a flicker of a second, his mask cracked. She saw it, the recognition that she had beaten him in the one arena he thought untouchable. Later in Wilson's office, The conversation turned cold. That wind data wasn't bad luck, he said. It was fed false. Elizabeth's eyes narrowed. By who? Wilson hesitated. Harrison's people, maybe, or someone wanting you both distracted. Centurions bigger than either of you, bigger than this match. Her jaw tightened. They wanted me humiliated, and when that failed, they wanted him. Wilson leaned forward. Which means, Admiral, you're in the crosshairs, both of you are. Elizabeth left the office that night with a truth gnawing at her ribs. The shots she had fired weren't the test. They were the opening move. In her apartment, she sat with her rifle across her lap, staring out over the city's restless lights. Somewhere, enemies had already decided the rules of this shadow game. Somewhere, Harrison was plotting his counter. And somewhere inside herself, Elizabeth wrestled with the question that had followed her for decades. How much of her silence was dignity? And how much was surrender? Tomorrow she would find out. Why did Wilson call her into the Situation Room at midnight? Elizabeth Morgan entered with Reynolds at her side, the air heavy with urgency. A wall of screens glowed with satellite feeds, naval fleets, drone footage, coded transmissions. Intelligence officers whispered, their faces pale with something beyond routine crisis. Wilson stood at the head of the table, his tone stripped of ceremony. Centurions live. We've confirmed a breach. Elizabeth took her seat, eyes locked on the data streaming past. Define breach. Wilson tapped a screen. A convoy of unmarked trucks moved across a desert highway in northern Syria, escorted by mercenaries. Not state actors, not officially, but the payload, long, shielded containers, spoke volumes. Hypersonic prototypes, Wilson said grimly. Ours stolen, being moved for reverse engineering. Elizabeth's chest tightened. Centurion wasn't a theory anymore. It was real and in enemy hands. Reynolds leaned closer. That explains the sabotage at the range, distraction. Wilson nodded. And more. We intercepted chatter linking Harrison's name to the leak. At least that's what someone wants us to believe. Elizabeth froze. Harrison, always the shadow, always the rival. But was he part of this or being framed like her? She spoke slowly, choosing each word like it might carry shrapnel. If Centurions compromised, we're already behind. What's the mission? Wilson's eyes flicked to her, measuring. We want you in the field. The silence that followed was almost absurd. A four-star admiral in the field, but Wilson wasn't joking. We need someone with clearance, skill, and deniability. The convoy is guarded by former Spetsnaz. They won't expect an admiral. They won't expect you. Elizabeth glanced at Reynolds, then back at Wilson. And Harrison. Wilson's voice dropped. He's already in theater. Her pulse steadied into something sharper than fear. If this was a trap, she was already inside it. If it wasn't, then the truth about Harrison, about Archimedes, about everything, would surface in the fight ahead. Hours later, under the cover of a moonless sky, she boarded a stealth transport bound for the Mediterranean. Reynolds checked gear methodically, suppressed rifle, sidearm, comms, rationed calm. Elizabeth shouldered the weight of her father's words, his rifle now modified for the mission. Each adjustment felt like a thread pulling her back to Montana, to the lessons that had never left. You don't have to do this, Reynolds murmured. Her reply was quiet but unyielding. I've been doing this my whole life, just not where anyone could see. The insertion point was brutal. Cold water, night parachute, a mile swim to shore. Elizabeth felt every year in her bones, every scar pressed into muscle memory. But her arms still pulled, her lungs still burned steady, her heart still carried her forward. By dawn, she was belly down in the sand, scoping the highway where the convoy would pass. Reynolds crouched nearby, watching her, not as an admiral now, but as a shooter. When the dust plume appeared, Elizabeth steadied the rifle. 6 trucks, armored escort, too many. But she wasn't here to kill them all. She was here to see, to listen, to find the proof. Through the scope, she spotted him. Harrison, standing atop one of the escort vehicles, barking orders with the ease of a man at home in chaos. Elizabeth's breath froze. Was he leading this operation, or infiltrating it like her? Her finger hovered over the trigger, the reticle steady on his chest. One pull, and the ghosts of Archimedes would be buried with him forever. But something stopped her. Not doubt, not fear, something deeper. Because in his stance and the way his eyes scanned the ridgeline, she recognized it. Harrison wasn't commanding. He was hunting. Not her, someone else. The convoy slowed. A second group of armed men emerged from the tree line, their patches unfamiliar. Private contractors, not Russian, not American, a third hand in the game. The trap wasn't for Harrison. It wasn't for her. It was for Centurion itself. Elizabeth's chest tightened as realization cut sharp. They were pawns on the same board, bait strung out for someone else's play. And in that moment she understood. The real fight hadn't even begun. Her breath steadied, her scope shifted. The first contractor moved to plant charges. Elizabeth squeezed the trigger. The war for Centurion had just found its spark. The first shot tore through the dawn silence, and chaos followed. Contractors scattered, some firing blindly into the tree line, others moving to secure the convoy. Reynolds fired beside her, his rounds precise, disciplined. Elizabeth's eyes stayed fixed through the scope, cutting down two men who tried to flank. And then, impossibly, Harrison's rifle spoke too. His shots weren't aimed at her. They were cutting into the contractors, the same enemy she'd just engaged. His voice crackled over a hijacked comms channel. "Admiral, we don't have time for old grudges. You cover left. I'll hold the road." Elizabeth hesitated only a second. Then she shifted, putting down another hostile creeping on Reynolds' blind side. For the first time in their lives, she and Harrison were firing in tandem. The firefight stretched minutes that felt like hours. When the last contractor fell, smoke rose from the roadside, the convoy stalled, men groaning where they lay. Harrison climbed down from the armored truck, rifle slung, hands open. "Looks like we're both in the same mess," he said. His voice was hoarse, not arrogant, but edged with something she had never heard from him before: fatigue. Elizabeth rose slowly, weapon trained, her eyes locked on his. "Tell me why you're here." Harrison's jaw clenched. "For the same reason you are, Centurion. Only I was told you were the leak." The accusation hung between them, bitter, sharp. Elizabeth lowered her rifle half an inch, but her voice stayed steady. "And someone told me the same about you." Reynolds scanned the highway, nerves taut. "Then who's playing who?" Harrison gave a mirthless laugh. "That's the question, isn't it? Someone wants us tearing each other apart while they walk Centurion across the border." Elizabeth's chest tightened. The weight of years of mistrust, of lies, of ghosts pressed against this moment. Her father's words echoed back. He forgets instinct. He trusts machines. But right now, Harrison's eyes weren't the eyes of a machine. They were human, tired, angry, determined. "Fine," she said at last. "We work together for now, but if I find out you're lying—" "You'll put a round between my eyes," Harrison finished for her. "I'd expect nothing less." The uneasy truce held as they swept the convoy. Most of the containers were decoys, empty, waited for deception. But one bore the signs of a rush job: bolts misaligned, welds sloppy. Harrison ran his hand along its side, listening. "Not empty," he muttered. Reynolds crouched, examining the locks. "Biometric seal, American design, this is ours." Elizabeth's throat went dry. Centurion in the flesh. Before they could move it, the hiss of rotors cut through the smoke. A helicopter, inbound, fast, black paint glinting in the morning light. Not military. Contractors again. Elizabeth dropped prone, scope finding the open side door. Gunner, heavy weapon, spooling up. 3 seconds, Harrison barked. Elizabeth steadied, half breath, squeezed. The gunner crumpled, weapon swinging useless as the chopper jerked off balance. Harrison fired next, a clean shot through the cockpit. The helicopter spiraled, slammed into the sand beyond the ridge in a fireball. The ground shook beneath them. Silence followed, broken only by the ticking of cooling metal. Elizabeth lowered her rifle, chest rising with controlled breaths. Harrison exhaled sharply, almost a laugh. Guess we make a decent team when no one's keeping score. Elizabeth gave him a long, hard look. Don't mistake necessity for trust. Harrison smirked, but there was no venom in it. Fair enough. They stood over the container, smoke curling behind them, the wreckage of enemies scattered across the sand. The world had shifted. Old enemies were now reluctant allies. Centurion was no longer rumor but reality. And somewhere in the shadows, the true thief, the true architect of this chaos, was still unseen. Elizabeth's eyes drifted east, toward the horizon glowing with first light. The fight was only beginning. And for the first time, she wondered if survival meant not just beating Harrison, but becoming something more than the ghosts both of them carried. How do you move something the world isn't supposed to know exists? That was the question hanging over Elizabeth, Reynolds, and Harrison as they stood beside the container, dawn spilling across the desert. Centurion wasn't small, wasn't subtle. It was a steel secret the size of a boxcar, humming faintly like it knew the power it contained. Reynolds kept scanning the ridgeline, every nerve taut. We don't have long. Whoever sent that helicopter has more on the way. Elizabeth knelt by the biometric lock, running her fingers across the scorched metal. Her pulse was steady, but her chest ached with the weight of choices. We can't move it, not by ourselves, but we can't leave it here either. Harrison crouched opposite, his face tight with calculation. Satellite coverage will pick us up inside 30 minutes. The Pentagon will know exactly where this crate is. Then comes the cavalry, or the cover-up. Elizabeth's jaw set. You think they'll send help? Harrison's silence was answer enough. Reynolds swore softly. So we're carrying a live nuke with 3 rifles and no friends. Elizabeth's eyes narrowed. Not a nuke. Worse. Hypersonics change balance. Whoever holds this wins the next war before it starts. The desert wind shifted, whispering through broken trucks through the dead. For a moment, no one spoke. Finally, Harrison broke it. There's a wadi 2 clicks north, deep enough to hide this for a day, maybe 2. Buy us time to figure out who's pulling strings. Elizabeth studied him. The old rivalry flared in her gut, memories of Archimedes, of lies. But here in the sand, he wasn't just the ghost. He was a man facing the same trap she was. Fine, she said, but we move it together. The 3 of them rigged tow cables from the armored trucks, engines coughing to life under reluctant sparks. Steel groaned as the container shifted, dragging across sand and rock. Sweat streaked Elizabeth's face beneath the desert sun, each pull a reminder of how fragile even steel looked when measured against human will. By midday they reached the wadi, a dry riverbed carved deep, shadowed enough to swallow the container whole. Reynolds backed the truck carefully, easing the cargo into the natural trench. It sank into shade, hidden from eyes above. Elizabeth leaned against the truck, chest heaving, sweat drying into salt on her lips. She let the silence stretch, then said the thing none of them wanted to admit. They'll come for it, ours, theirs, doesn't matter. Centurion doesn't get forgotten. Harrison pulled off his gloves, staring at the container. Then we make a choice, destroy it or guard it. Reynolds looked between them. You 2 spent your lives proving who's the better shot. Now you're going to argue over which flag gets to weaponize the future. Elizabeth's gaze cut sharp. It's not about flags anymore. It's about who writes the rules when this thing goes public. The weight of it pressed on all of them. Bigger than medals, bigger than careers, bigger than grudges. As the sun dipped lower, a drone's faint whine pricked the silence. Elizabeth's eyes shot skyward, catching the shimmer of wings. Not American, not Russian. She snapped her rifle up, breath steady, finger tightening. The round tore skyward, clipping the drone's sensor pod. Sparks spilled and the machine spiraled into the rocks. The smoke curled up like a signal flare. "Clock's ticking," Reynolds muttered. Elizabeth lowered her rifle, the echo still ringing in her chest. Harrison stepped closer, his voice low, almost grudging. "You're not the symbol they said you were. You're still the shooter from Archimedes." Her jaw tightened. "You knew." His eyes didn't flinch. "I suspected. No one makes those shots without instinct, without something more." The words hung there, bitter and heavy. For years he had stolen her truth. For years she had let him. And now, standing over Centurion, she realized something she hadn't dared before. Archimedes wasn't the end of her story. It was only the beginning. The sun sank behind jagged hills. Night crept in, bringing new shadows, new dangers. The wadi hid them for now, but tomorrow would come, and with it, enemies on every side. Elizabeth checked her rifle one last time, settling into the sand. Her voice was quiet but unshakable. "Tonight we hold the line. Tomorrow we find out who's really pulling the trigger." The first betrayal came at dusk. Elizabeth heard it in the crunch of boots above the wadi, too many for chance, too quiet for allies. Reynolds caught her eye, raising a fist. Harrison lifted his rifle without a word. Shadows appeared against the fading light, black-clad silhouettes, their movements crisp, professional. Not mercenaries this time, not Russians, Americans. "Special Activities Division," Harrison muttered. "They're here for the crate." Elizabeth's chest went cold. "Our own." The team descended without hesitation, rifles up, voices commanding. "Step away from the container, hands where we can see them." Elizabeth stood slowly, weapon still slung. Her voice carried the full authority of 4 stars. "This is Admiral Elizabeth Morgan. On whose order are you here?" No reply, only the safety clicks of rifles. One operator stepped forward, visor glinting. "Orders are above your pay grade, Admiral. Step aside." Harrison barked a sharp laugh, bitter as gunpowder. "Above a 4-star, that means the White House doesn't even know." The moment cracked like glass. Reynolds' finger twitched on the trigger. Elizabeth felt her pulse slow, her father's voice whispering back through the years. Breathing controls everything. She raised her hand slightly. "If you take Centurion, you doom the balance. You hand the next war to shadows. You know that." The operator didn't flinch. "Not my call, step aside." Elizabeth looked at Reynolds, then at Harrison. 3 rifles, a trench, and a secret too heavy for the world. "Then we don't step aside," she said. The firefight tore the night apart. Muzzle flashes strobed against rock, bullets cutting the air into shards. Reynolds moved like water, Harrison like a storm, Elizabeth a calm center, every shot deliberate, every breath measured. One by one, the operators fell, but the price came swift. Reynolds staggered under the impact of a round, blood darkening his sleeve. He pressed on, jaw clenched, still firing. "Go," he shouted, "end this." Elizabeth dropped behind the crate, chest heaving. Harrison slid beside her, face streaked with dust and rage. "They'll keep coming," he growled. "We either move it or end it." Elizabeth's eyes locked on the biometric lock. Destroy Centurion and erase everything, or guard it and invite endless war. Her father's voice echoed again. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." She exhaled. "We end it." Together she and Harrison rigged charges along the welds, Reynolds covering with fading strength. The wadi echoed with small explosions, steel splitting, fire catching. The container crumpled inward, its secrets consumed by flame. When the last detonation rolled across the desert, silence followed. Only smoke remained. Reynolds lay against the rocks, pale, whispering, "Worth it." Elizabeth gripped his hand, "Worth it." Harrison stood apart, rifle hanging loose, his silhouette framed against the burning wreck. His voice was low, almost reverent. Guess we'll never know who wanted it most. Elizabeth rose slowly, her body aching, her chest heavy with more than exhaustion. We don't need to know, we only needed to stop it. They left the wadi before dawn, the fire behind them marking not victory, not defeat, but choice. And in the quiet steps back across the desert, Elizabeth carried the truth she had fought for since Archimedes. She was not a symbol, not bait, not a ghost shadow. She was what her father had taught her to be: patience, precision, dignity. And sometimes, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.